who's heard the saying, mum knows best? I have. Well, it's probably even more true in the case of your microbes. Okay, because you inherited all of your microbes from your mum at birth. Because when the baby moves through the birth canal, he or she gets covered with microbes in the birthing fluid. Okay, and those tiny little microbes, only a few are needed, not that many. They're like little seeds. Picture a garden, basically. You've got wonderful soil there in the baby's gut. Only a few little seedlings need to enter the system to set up the inner ecosystem of the baby. Okay, but you can already think there, you might already be wondering, we're bypassing that process now. And we are, you're right. We're doing a lot of C-sections. We're going to talk about those in a second. So mum's microbiome is a reflection of her environment. See, a lot of people don't know that. Some people think, oh, well, bacteria, everybody's got the same things. No, not at all. Let's say that mum's a Grange local. She's got microbes that work best in the Grange environment. And as a result, she's going to pass those on to baby so that baby has the best chance of survival and thriving in that very given environment. Okay, because the microbes want you to live, because if you don't live, they don't have anywhere to live, right? Okay, so they become a reflection of the environment. So let's say there's a really good example, the Yanomami tribe over in the Amazon, they have a parasite in them, which we go, oh my God, parasite. But it turns out that parasite helps them deal with the excess starches in their diet. That's a really good example of the environmental factor there. So that's all passed on from mum to little baby. Here we go, everything I've learned about the environment, enjoy. It's training the immune system. There's a bacteria called segmented filamentous bacteria. A long, tricky word. But basically, these guys are the first microbes to enter the system. And they basically come in and they shut down the immune system of the baby in a good way. They say, okay, immune system, hang on. Everyone's coming in from mum, so we need you to calm down because we're going to come in and set up shop. That's kind of how they do it. That's actually what they say. No. Okay, so they come in and they set up the immune system. Now that is important because even if there's an infection from mum, she'll pass that on to the baby. Okay, because remember they're segmented filamentous bacteria. They come in and they shut down the immune system. So even though it's a bad guy, it's like, well, mum knows best. That's what nature says. Okay, so that's got to be important as we move on. So yes, we're bypassing this process a lot now. C-sections, it's such a controversial topic, but it shouldn't be. We don't need to be so emotionally attached to it. The fact is, rates in Australia have risen from 18% in 1991 to 32% in 2015. We have the highest C-section rate in the world. The World Health Organization, not InfoWars, not Truth Wars, the World Health Organization says that no region has an excuse to exceed a 10 to 15% C-section rate. What are we doing here? Mums are now feeling pressured to undergo the procedure. It's a shame. Look at this poor girl. She didn't want a C-section. Look at her, she's just wiped out. I love that picture. So a doctor doesn't have time anymore. Okay, hospitals are quite understaffed. We know that. And plus there's a financial incentive, unfortunately. Now doctors will get paid the same amount for a surgical versus non-surgical birth, but if a doctor or surgeon can schedule in 300 surgical births a year as opposed to waiting for 200 stubborn babies to arrive, he makes more money. So there's not a direct financial incentive, but there's an inherent one. And that's something we need to change. We know that when there's a financial incentive, judgment gets clouded, doesn't it? So C-sections save lives as well. I want to point that out. And it's not about slamming them. It's not about making people feel guilty about having them. No, that's not the case at all. We need to objectively look at C-sections, look at the implications they're having on us and on the health of our children and work with that. There are studies now going on all over the world where people are manually seeding their babies. So what that means is that they're doing the C-section for whatever reason, and then they're taking the vaginal fluid and they're dabbing it around baby, or they're taking a swab and putting it all around baby. And there's some big studies, and we're slowly starting to see some outcomes. So we can't really say if it works well yet. But what we've also seen is that C-section babies are being administered with probiotics when they're born, like lactobacillus. Okay, so C-section babies, we know through various observational studies now, they have drastically increased rates of obesity and overweight, diabetes, asthma, and allergies. And there's probably a whole lot more. Okay, so this is known. This isn't in contention at all. This is quite well known. Okay, so we need to counteract that. We need to say, okay, well, hang on, if a C-section is necessary, what can we do? Probiotic supplementation or intervention during that time, I think, will be a huge leap into the future, and it'll be a massive part of what we do as we continue forward. Because right now, I mean, our childhood illness rates are skyrocketing. Any teachers in the room? Yeah, did you know how to use an EpiPen 10, 15 years ago? No. And you wouldn't leave on excursion without one now, would you? All linked to the gut bacteria. Autism, according to the Citizens Commission on Human Rights here in Australia, at the turn of the last century, autism had a rate of 1 in 1,000. Now it's close to 3%. What's that? And even with increased diagnosis, let's say that jumps it up a whole bunch as well, that doesn't account for that. So something's going on where autism has been strongly linked to the actions of the gut microbes. Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, who I spoke to on my podcast, she said that when the gut becomes a source of toxicity instead of a source of nutrition, that's when autism can occur. Okay, because it just poisons the brain. And there are certain microbes that are very consistently found in autistic children. Yes, there's a lot of stuff going on. There was a big piece on this, a really nice story by the ABC called Gut Reaction on Catalyst. It's really cool. So we've got a whole bunch of other illnesses too. Allergies, 5%. I mean, what a tragedy. They can't even take almond butter to school anymore. It's got too much nuts in it. Sad. A quarter of our kids are obese or overweight. A quarter. Even I remember being at school and it was 1 in 10, I reckon, that were overweight. Asthma. 41% of kids have an asthma action plan in place. What? Asthma is routinely turned around in the laboratory. They induce it in mice and they turn it around with probiotic supplementation. Routinely. Why isn't this being taught? Who knows? Cancer, still pretty low. Mental health, huge, 10%, and then as people get older, it jumps up. All linked to gut microbes. Dr. Martin Blazer, really interesting fellow from New York University. Just as today the kids are lining up for the vaccines, in the future, maybe the kids are going to be drinking certain organisms so that we can replace the ones that they've lost. He's done a lot of work looking at missing microbes. That's the name of his book, actually. And he found that H. pylori, for example, the stomach ulcer bug, is actually very important. So he found that H. pylori is not just a stomach ulcer bug. It's actually very important for our immune system and at regulating our appetite. And when we take too many antibiotics, goes away. Okay, so it's only in certain concentrations that H. pylori becomes an issue, and we're going to talk about that in a second. It's really interesting stuff.